How's it going, Starseekers? Welcome back to the channel and to a fresh new year. Today I'm going to be bringing you all a review of DungeonTop, a roguelike deck building game which released at the end of last month. The game sees you delving into dungeons and engaging in combat with enemies via tabletop style strategical card battles, and it features 3 playable classes, each with their own style of play and unique card decks. DungeonTop also incorporates some RPG elements as you earn XP from battles to level up your character, gaining new weapons and abilities in the process. As with many card-based strategy games, there are some reasonably complex mechanics at play in DungeonTop, so let's get into this review and take a look at what we're dealing with. So when you first load up DungeonTop, it's worth taking a look at the game's rulebook just to familiarise yourself with some of the game's core concepts and terminology. Although it's reasonably easy to just jump straight in and play a game, there's still quite a lot of information to take in, and the rulebook does a good job of explaining things. Now when you first hit play and begin a new game, you'll be taken into a short tutorial which talks you through a simple battle, explaining things like card drawing and placement, mana, card movement and attacking. After completing the tutorial, you're then kicked back to the main menu to start a game for real, which first requires you to create a new hero. Now the game has 3 classes for you to choose from, a warrior, a mage and a rogue, but to start with only the warrior is unlocked and you're going to have to earn some gold to unlock the other 2. Each character has their strengths and weaknesses, offering different styles of play, and characters come with different stats, starter weapons and a pool of talents which are selected from each time you level up. I liked the variety that these different characters brought to gameplay, but I have to say that both the rogue and mage playstyles were a lot more complex, so I advise playing a few games with a warrior to nail the basics. He's by far the easiest of the 3, and the card mechanics within his decks are the simplest to understand. Now in the standard game mode, you're able to select one of 3 factions, which determines which cards will be included in your basic starter deck, and you can think of each of these factions like character builds in RPG games. Each set of cards affects the way in which you approach battles and what abilities or spells you're going to be focusing on in a run, and it's worthwhile trying out all 3 to see which faction you prefer. To begin with, I went with what seemed to be the simplest of the 3 factions, the Guardians of Helm, which provided me with a decent assortment of minion cards and a couple of ability cards, but in my second run I played with a deck which focused on buffing my minions, increasing their attack and HP values, and I found this to be a much stronger playstyle. So each time you enter into a new dungeon, its layout, enemy placements and encounters are all randomly generated, making each playthrough unique. You're able to move between rooms on the dungeon map, and the basic objective is to beat the dungeon boss to move up to the next floor, with each dungeon containing 3 floors. In order to reach the dungeon boss though, you're going to have to fight your way through a bunch of smaller enemies, and the number of battles remaining is displayed below the dungeon name, though this changes as you unlock doors on your current floor. Now as you move around the dungeon, enemy encounters are indicated by small portraits in rooms, and stepping into the room will initiate the encounter. Prior to beginning the battle, you're able to take a peek at the enemy's deck to strategize on how best to beat them, but you're unable to back out of an encounter once it begins, so your only option is to either fight or attempt to flee, though your chance to flee is reduced each time you succeed in doing so. Entering into a battle then, 5 cards will be drawn at random from your deck, and before combat begins, you're able to select which ones you want to keep and which ones you want to redraw. Once you're happy, the battle will begin, and combat takes place on grid-like playing fields of varying sizes, with each player taking turns to play cards, but you always get to go first in battles. Now most of the cards that you play cost specific amounts of mana denoted by the number within the blue hexagon, and your total remaining mana for this turn can be seen in the bottom left. To win battles, you simply need to reduce your opponent's HP to 0, but if your character's HP is reduced to 0, you lose the battle and your run is over. Like many card-based battle games, each unit has an attack value and health points, and in DungeonTop these values can be seen on both player and enemy avatars as well as minions, and your health is indicated by numbers within the red shield icon, while the number within the yellow hexagon indicates how much damage each card deals. Now I'm not going to be going into too much depth with battles, as there are far too many card mechanics in DungeonTop to discuss in this review, but I'll quickly explain how a basic battle can play out. You start by placing minion cards into the playfield, though these must be placed on squares adjacent to your character or adjacent to other minions that you control. Most minions are unable to act when first summoned, though there are a few who have the haste ability which allows them to act and move as soon as they're summoned, and there are also haste spells which can be played on minions to provide the same effect. Once all your mana is spent, you then end your turn and the enemy plays their cards or abilities, and enemies cycle through the cards in the decks, only playing one type of card each turn, and you're able to see their upcoming cards at the top of the screen. Now each new turn, characters and minions that are in play are able to move a specific number of spaces on the board determined by the move values, and they can perform attacks on enemy minions or the enemy avatar. Depending on the type of card, minions can deal damage in a number of different ways. Some just have standard attacks which can be dealt to enemies on an adjacent tile, others attack at a range, and some even have the multi-strike ability allowing them to attack more than once, while other minions are able to deal splash damage in an area. When it comes to your character's attacks, you're able to equip various types of weapons which can also modify them, granting things like multi-strike or chain strike, which deals damage to all enemies next to each other. Now while you can attack directly with your character, for the most part you're going to be relying on minions to do most of the dirty work. And while I was surprised at how much depth there was to the game's mechanics, there is a bit of a downside to this, as when you first start playing you'll likely spend a lot of time checking out what enemy minions and abilities do, as well as your own units when you gain new ones. Enemy encounters often require different strategies to defeat them depending on how the minions function, and one strategy that I used was to surround the enemy avatar with my own troops, which stopped him summoning minions on his turn. However, this strategy doesn't always work, because as well as standard enemies, you'll also encounter challenging elite enemies who occupy 4 spaces and usually deal a lot of damage to all minions surrounding them. After defeating enemies, you'll obtain loot in the form of new minion cards, spells or weapons, as well as rare treasure cards, which can be sold to earn gold that can then be used to unlock new characters or cards for the decks. You also earn XP which goes towards leveling up your character, and each level up improves your stats a little and allows you to pick a talent which includes things like additional mana points, healing after fights, or boosts to your stats. Now as you explore through the game's dungeons, in addition to enemies you'll also come across a bunch of other encounters. There are shops where you can buy new cards, healers who restore your HP, blacksmiths who can increase the star rating of cards, improving minions' attack and HP stats or the effectiveness of spells and abilities, and treasure chests containing minions, spells, weapons or relics which offer additional benefits to your characters. Now once you reach the end of the dungeon floor, you then go up against the dungeon boss, and like elite enemies, these occupy multiple spaces and are pretty challenging to beat. Once defeated, the door to the next floor is opened, and before you proceed you can cash in any special treasure cards that you've found to earn extra gold, which is something to consider because dying will reduce the value of these cards. After I began working my way through the second floor and got to the second floor boss, I noticed a considerable jump in the difficulty of enemy encounters despite me smashing my way through most of the first floor enemies without much issue. And despite me not having the time to play a lot of DungeonTop, I have a feeling that earning gold to unlock more powerful cards is going to play a key part in progressing further in runs. Now I will say that there's a lot to take in with DungeonTop, and I was surprised by the depth of its mechanics considering the low asking price of the game. I've personally enjoyed quite a few card based strategy games, and DungeonTop is definitely one of the better ones and has plenty of content to keep fans of the genre occupied for some time. In addition to the 3 character options which offers more complex mechanics and playstyles, after your first game you also unlock draft mode, which instead of having pre-made decks, allows you to build your own starter deck by selecting 10 cards from 6 random packs of 5 cards. If you smash your way through all 3 dungeon floors and are looking for even more of a challenge, you can also increase the dungeon ferocity up to 15 times, and each level of ferocity adds additional modifiers to the game which are cumulative. While I think this is a good way of increasing the game's difficulty, I do think that this system would have been better if you could customise your run by toggling specific modifiers on or off. Now when it comes to the game's visuals, we get some really nice artwork which reminded me a lot of The Darkest Dungeon. And audio wise, whilst things are relatively generic in terms of sound effects and you get your typical adventure type music, everything sounded pretty good and I've got no complaints. On the whole, I was actually pretty impressed by DungeonTop. Its gameplay is solid, there's plenty of variety offered by its characters, cards and randomly generated dungeons, and if I had more time, it's definitely a game I could sink plenty of hours into. So now we come to rating the game, and I give games a rating between 1 and 5 stars based on the quality and quantity of the gameplay and whether I think it offers value for money to potential buyers. For a rating, I'm going to be giving DungeonTop 4 out of 5 stars. If you're a fan of card-based strategy games or roguelikes, then I highly recommend you check out DungeonTop. There's plenty of content on offer for the price, and enough challenge to satisfy even the most hardcore players out there. You can pick up DungeonTop from the UK Switch eShop, where it's usually priced at £12.59, or from the US eShop, where it's usually $13.99. Alternatively, the game's also available on PlayStation 4 and Steam. And that's just about it for this review of DungeonTop, so if you enjoyed it, make sure you hit that like button, and if you like what you see in this review, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I upload new detailed and honest reviews every few days. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, stay safe and game on.